Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As we just talked about Thursday night's game between the Chiefs and the Ravens from the Kansas City perspective, now I want to look on the other side for the Ravens. And again, any loss is disappointing, but ultimately this was a close game. They showed that they can compete with the best team in the NFL. And I mean, again, if Isaiah Likely's foot is just a centimeter back, that's a touchdown, and the Ravens were looking to go for it for two, it seemed like, at least, with John Harbaugh pretty emphatically holding up the two fingers after it seemed like that touchdown was going to stand at first. So I don't think we were ever getting to overtime in this game, and I don't want to get too far into this because we're talking hypotheticals, but I think if the Ravens do score there on that Likely play at the back of the end zone and they go for two, I think that they were going to be able to convert. Just that team at the goal line is going to be very scary, in my opinion, with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. But on the note of Derrick Henry, I want to get into this idea that I thought that the Ravens were going to come out in this game in particular, considering how the AFC Championship game went down, and that they were going to reestablish the running game headed into this season. Now, that didn't really end up being the case. Lamar Jackson, 41 pass attempts in this game, also had a number of different scrambles out of dropbacks as well that sort of skew the numbers a little bit more towards the running game, but they went pretty pass heavy in this game once again. And because of the fact that Lamar was scrambling and some of the designed quarterback plays, there was absolutely a running game. Lamar Jackson, 122 rushing yards in this game, but outside of that, wasn't really an elite running game overall. Derrick Henry was not as big of a factor as I was anticipating. Lamar Jackson had more rushing attempts than the rest of the Ravens combined in this game. Henry in this game, 13 carries, 46 yards, did score the first touchdown of the game, and that's where I just mentioned I think that the Ravens offense can be scary in the red zone. That's where I do feel like Derrick Henry is going to have a definitive role for himself. But overall, this could be a little bit more of a limited year from Derrick Henry than I was anticipating. It was pretty clear that his role is going to be reduced in comparison to what we saw for so many years in Tennessee, where he was the, bell cow workhorse running back for them. In this game, any real passing situation, they were deciding to put in Justice Hill instead. And it ultimately worked for them in the passing game. I think that Lamar definitely does like his checkdowns as well. And Justice Hill, he had a number of receptions in that AFC Championship game. In this game for Justice Hill, 8 targets as well. And I think that that's sort of a different conversation that I'm going to wait to get into, but Lamar's sort of hesitancy to push it downfield quite as much. But Justice Hill, is just definitively a better receiving running back than Derrick Henry. That being said, we saw him get touches in the red zone and ultimately resulted in a touchdown. So I do think that he is going to have a productive season, especially in terms of rushing touchdowns. But again, this is somebody who just last year led the NFL in carries. I don't anticipate that being the case once again. I'm sure there are some bumps that the Ravens would like to have Derrick Henry be a more prominent of their every down offense. But, baby steps, I suppose. This was Henry's first official game with the Ravens, so these things do tend to take a little bit of time. But I did think that there were definitely glimpses of Baltimore being able to have this two-headed monster in the backfield. Towards the end of that first drive, especially, Henry started getting himself going then, and then he ends up scoring a touchdown, obviously, on that first drive. Henry had back-to-back solid runs to set up a 3rd and short. They fake it to him, and Lamar Jackson at one point pulls it to the outside for 11 an 11-yard gain coming off of those successful runs with Derrick Henry. And then the first play of the next drive, it was a play action pass, fakes the handoff to Derrick Henry, and ends up being a 15-yard dump off to Isaiah Likely, who obviously had a huge game, and we'll get into his performance specifically. But again, as for Derrick Henry, I'm not out on him entirely. I think that there are a number of different ways that this Ravens team is going to have to improve. One of them being Derrick Henry, being a more prominent part of their offense. Additionally, though, he can't do it by himself. There were some tough moments for the Ravens offensive line in this game, considering the fact that I thought, especially throughout the first three quarters, they were struggling a little bit. Now, this is to be expected, at least to some degree, losing three starters from what was a very good offensive line last season, that the overall cohesion isn't what it was last year. I'm not really sure what was going on at right tackle for them in this game. Last year, losing their right tackle from last year. Ultimately, Patrick McCary won out the starting job in training camp, it at least seemed like, but Roger Rosengarten, their second-round rookie that they drafted out of Washington, did get a good amount of run time as well. Early on in the game, after he came in on the third drive, he did have a very unfortunate welcome to the NFL moment where it was Chris Jones working on him, shucking him to the side, and ultimately wrapping up Lamar for what ended up being the strip sack. But even worse than that for Rosengarten was the fact that it was Chris Jones wrapping up Lamar, and then Rosengarten was sort of trying to chase down a defender as well, and he sort of ran through the arm of Lamar Jackson. So Rosengarten with a little bit of a forced fumble there. But ultimately, everybody has their welcome to the NFL moment. Rosengarten got hit with it immediately, but him and McCary did sort of split reps in this game. I'm not sure if it was injury related to McCary. I thought that they switched back and forth a couple times. I could be mistaken there, but something to keep an eye on moving forward here. And just in general as well, this offensive line I think is something that eventually could shape into form. You saw the fourth quarter. I thought that they were actually the ones that were maybe slightly better conditioned than the Chiefs defense, considering the fact that they were moving the ball pretty well in that fourth quarter and on the ground game. So I'm not ruling them out just yet. And that's also a very tough Chiefs front seven as well. So it's not like they had any cakewalk headed into the season either. I'm not panicking about it, but that being said, we're going to need to see them be better. But all of this to be said, I think it sort of brings us to this conversation with Lamar Jackson, where the offensive line had moments opening up the dropbacks and giving Lamar Jackson a clean pocket. Not super consistently, though, so they'll need to improve there. Lamar Jackson as well had a great game based off of the running game. Like we mentioned, 16 carries, 122 yards, and really he was the sole reason that they were, sticking around in this game, was because of the fact that with the running prowess, he was so impressive. That being said, I was pretty underwhelmed with the passing as a whole, and it's fine. Yeah, I could be maybe nitpicking a little bit here, but I don't think that Lamar Jackson looked very good at all in terms of attacking downfield. Thought it was a lot of dump-offs, even Isaiah Likely. Now, the touchdown pass to him was a very nice play from Lamar Jackson, scrambling around with defenders in his area, rolling out to his right on the run. Very impressive. Outside of that, though, I thought that Lamar was off on a lot of his deeper shots, and it gets magnified as well, the fact that he misses a couple throws on that final drive, one to Isaiah Likely, one to Zay Flowers, that could have changed the outcome of this game. At least would have definitely, to some degree, changed the output of this game, but ultimately, I didn't think he looked very impressive in the passing game, and that's the thing. I have confidence in Lamar Jackson's passing ability. I thought that he displayed it last year, and I am a believer, and I'm sort of just rooting. Maybe I'm investing myself too much into it, but I'm rooting for Lamar to prove all of these doubters wrong about the idea that he isn't a passing quarterback, because I think he has that in his game, but last night wasn't a very good display of that, in my opinion, and the counting stats look pretty solid overall for Lamar. 26 of 41, 273 yards and a touchdown. But again, a lot of it was passes around the line of scrimmage, relying a lot on receivers running after the catch. Again, I'm trying to say this in not a negative way for Lamar Jackson, but just I think he would also admit that in the passing game, he could have been better. And that's something that I anticipate will get better moving forward. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section on that. Some quick notes defensively for the Ravens. I thought they looked pretty good. Now, they allowed 350 yards, so it's not like they were shut down by any means. The blown coverage by Marlon Humphrey was pretty rough. The one that opened up the wide open touchdown for Xavier Worthy in the second half. That was a brutal moment for them, but ultimately, playing the Chiefs with all of these playmakers, you take away that one play and, it's not necessarily a fair way to go about things, but I do feel like overall you can feel pretty good about how this Ravens team looked. The front seven looked strong as ever. A little bit of worries, I suppose, with their linebackers getting caught in coverage a number of times, and it's tough when you're playing Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, the way that they are going to draw up plays to get your linebackers on their speedsters, and obviously Mahomes is going to find them. So, guys like Marcus Williams had some not great Roquan Smith as well, to some degree, in coverage. Didn't look great. That's to be expected a little bit. But overall, I thought the D-line played really well. And you had some key young players standing out especially. Odafe Owe has been a very good player for the past couple years. And, he continues to be headed on the right trajectory for them. But then you got other contributions as well that I thought were really impactful. Travis Jones, the defensive tackle, he had a pretty nice game. You look at David Ojabo, who, finally is healthy, former second-round pick in 2022, and he ends up with a sack. So all things considered, I thought that their front seven played pretty well. Also got some really nice contributions from Trenton Simpson. 5 tackles in this game, recorded half a sack, and had a really nice pass deflection. I just mentioned linebackers struggling in coverage a little bit. That wasn't the case for Simpson. He had a nice pass breakup against Rashee Rice. He also had a really nice tackle out on the perimeter. He's an athlete. He can move around the field. He can be versatile for this Ravens defense. So you look at Patrick Queen, headed out the door in free agency this offseason. Trenton Simpson could take on a bigger role this upcoming year and be a real contributor for this Ravens team and help avoid any sort of a significant drop-off from what was the number one scoring defense. No, I always forget, number 1 or number 2 scoring defense in the NFL last season. The Chiefs and the Ravens were 1 and 2. And so the fact that past 2 times we've seen both of these teams they've been playing, or past 2 times I've seen the Ravens, they have played the Chiefs, which gets me jumbled up a little bit. But that being said, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section about what your takeaways were for the Ravens. Is there any sort of panic for them? I would argue no. I do think that they have a difficult schedule, though, and this felt like, not a must-win by any means, because next week they have the Raiders, but then you're looking at Dallas versus Buffalo, at Cincinnati, so, they're going to have some real tests in front of them for the early portion of this season, but ultimately, I think they'll be okay. But we are also going to now be looking into some of the fantasy football specific implications from last night. Should fantasy owners be concerned about the lack of usage for Derrick Henry overall on the night? where are we at with the Isaiah Likely versus Mark Andrews split of target shares, and more. So we're going to dive into all of that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.